Salufalava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisuiki. Coming up, we take a look at some of the big stories from around the region this year. Also,
but I think with the numbers in Parliament that is supportive of the opposition group, Aisake'eke looks the most likely one.
Tonga will have a new Prime Minister next week, and we also review the best and worst Pacific sporting moments of 2024. We begin the show with a wrap highlighting some of the biggest stories from the Pacific region. There was no shortage of excitement and festivities, but there was also a lot of stories that brought communities together through challenging times. Here's our RNZ Pacific Afternoon Bulletin's editor and presenter, Lydia Lewis.
It's been a tumultuous year on the political front. Vanuatu, the country that's had 4 prime ministers in 3 years, is in political turmoil yet again, with a snap election scheduled for January 14 and former opposition MPs challenging the dissolution of Parliament. A former Vanuatu Prime Minister, Ismail Kalsakau, now on the opposition benches, wants action before Christmas.
Because they have matured, it would be a travesty of justice in itself if they were not permitted to progress.
And yes, all this while survivors are pulled from the rubble following a 7.3 magnitude quake the week before Christmas. More on that soon.
Jeremiah Manele has been elected Prime Minister of Solomon Islands.
The newly elected Solomon Islands Prime Minister had a motion moved against him, but that was withdrawn. Tonga's Prime Minister resigned ahead of a motion of no confidence against him.
This is the best way forward for Tonga, that I resign.
The election of Tonga's new Prime Minister is next week. Over the course of the year, Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister survived multiple attempts to oust him.
I'm pretty confident, relaxed, it's nothing personal. It's to the members of Parliament to pass the judgment.
Then there's Fiji. The coalition government there navigated some stormy waters.
I do not see it as a stumbling block. I think it will rejuvenate the party. It will re-energize the party. It's healthy for people to voice their differences. But
heads into the break intact. On the election front, Tuvalu elected Feleti Teo as their new Prime Minister. Palau's President, Surangil Whips Jr. returned.
I'm truly humbled by the results, and I'm grateful to the people of Palau for giving me the opportunity to serve them for another 4 years.
And Kiribasa's Danes Mamau retained power. The region experienced its fair share of natural disasters this year. Hundreds of people in Papua New Guinea's highlands were buried alive in a huge landslide which covered an entire village. The same area has been plagued by intense tribal fighting with mass casualties on all sides.
There's a big fight going on, claiming more than 20 plus lives have lost, properties. The employees of Pogora mine they are not going to work. The place is in chaos. There are so many houses are being burned. Property worth million skinners at the power stations is going up in flame right now as I'm speaking.
All the while, officials in Papua New Guinea tackled the massive task of counting the entire population in a national census. But it's been the political crisis in New Caledonia that's dominated the headlines. 1 month before deadly riots broke out, a pro-independence activist warned France to immediately halt planned constitutional amendments or face war.
We are here to tell them we must not make this mistake. Step by step, I think there will be war.
Then on May 13, riots broke out. 13 people have been killed since the unrest started. And there are many differing views on New Caledonia's political future.
New Caledonia is French territory, and it is the state which decides on who enters the French territory and when and how.
We must understand once and for all that New Caledonia is not French. We are in a process of decolonization that the French state must bring to its conclusion. There is no other alternative.
Because of the unrest, New Caledonia didn't attend this year's celebration of Pacific culture in Hawaii. The Festival of Pacific Arts and Culture is the world's largest event celebrating Pacific peoples.
Over 2,000 delegates from 27 nations around the world are here tonight for the grand opening ceremony.
And in a win for Pacific journalism, we made it to Nauru, which usually costs journalists $8,000 Australian dollars and is non-refundable. Honourable mention this year goes to Nauru. You can now buy yourself citizenship if you have a spare $100,000 US. Samoa hosts Tongan, a first for the Pacific Islands, and under considerable pressure given the New Zealand Navy vessel Manawanui sunk just a few weeks before. On the climate front, COP comes and goes again, and Vanuatu went to the International Court to hold big polluters to account. And now, the week before Christmas, a 7.3 magnitude earthquake strikes Vanuatu. Our Pacific editor, Kuroi Hawkins, will be on the ground in Vanuatu from Saturday local time.
And for the latest on this developing story, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific or our partner station's Facebook page, VBTC News. On Tuesday next week, MPs in Tonga will choose a new Prime Minister after the resignation of Huakaveme Siasi Sovaleni last week. Mr. Sovaleni was about to face a vote of no confidence and realised he had lost the backing of 3 nobles in his cabinet, meaning he couldn't win such a vote. Just who will take over the role will have less than a year because the country holds its general election at the end of 2025 is not yet clear. Don Wiseman garnered the view of our Tongan correspondent, Kalafi Moala.
For those that were calling for a vote of no confidence, in other words, the opposition group, Aisake is the man that they have as their candidate. And because he is the single candidate from that group, it looks most likely that he could be, by next Tuesday, he could be elected as the next Prime Minister.
We might come back to him in a moment, but there are other potential candidates still.
That's correct. From the opposition group, there were 2 other candidates that were possible. Dr. Fusimalohi, Daniela Fusimalohi from Ewa, and also Dr. Pingi Fasi from Nuku'alofa, number 2. They were talked about as possible candidates from the group. But the latest that we have got, of course, was that they were not going to be divided. If they were going to be divided, who's going to be on the candidacy, they may lose out already. However, from the group that belongs to the former Prime Minister, the group that is in government, Dr. Viliamilatu has been talked about as a candidate that would come in for that group. So those are basically the 2 major names that are being talked about, Aisake for the opposition and Viliamilatu for the those in government. But I think with the numbers in parliament that is supportive of the opposition group, Aisake looks the most likely one.
Well, and Aisake has been in parliament for a fair while. I know he did lose one election. He's been in cabinet previously. He's not someone who's distinguished himself, is he?
No, he came in with a couple of different portfolios. He's notable for the fact that he was the Minister of Finance for the very first reform government under the noble Tui Vakano. And then when Akilisi Pohiva became the Prime Minister in 2014, he also continued to have him as his finance minister. A couple of controversial things about Aisake, particularly in transparency area. Otherwise, he's been pretty much a stable guy in government, not so much as a leader, but somebody who was there occupying a government position.
The reasons for the vote of no confidence have now been published by the legislature, and it makes for quite interesting reading, doesn't it?
It does, sure does, yeah.
A wide-ranging list of alleged crimes by the Sovaleni government, but are they justified, do you think?
Actually, you can take that same list and apply it to any government previously. What is lacking in that list are very specific things that may be of a criminal nature that doesn't need a vote of no confidence. It needs to go to the prosecution. And that's what's lacking in that list. There are allegations, there are things that may be quite normal to have some concerns about. But of course, they wouldn't be listing all the different things that have been achieved by this government compared with previous governments.
This issue of the apparent standoff between the palace office and the Prime Minister's office and the outgoing government, no mention of that, and you'd have to wonder whether that's going to become an issue in whatever new government emerges.
That's correct, Don. As far as I'm concerned, as a journalist, a reporter from right here in Tonga, to me, that's the biggest issue at stake here. It's the strained relationship between the Prime Minister and His Majesty. It's been made more apparent, and the silence, particularly from the palace office, is not helping the situation. Mr. Sovaleni himself have already aired or given expression of how he has tried his best to keep a close relationship, but it hasn't been accepted. He has referred to that after he resigned. So who's going to be elected Prime Minister next week, and the kind of government that they're going to... It's not going to solve the actual problem in Tonga where the monarch and the Prime Minister could not work together. And even though you may change the Prime Minister, in a sense, it will still be the monarch that will be dictating things rather than a government. So that's a big issue, and there's no word on that.
2024 has also been a busy but exciting year for sports. Across the region, Pacifica sports team have left their own mark, even amongst the best in the world at different international events. And as the year wraps up, I'm joined by our RNZ Pacific senior sports journalist, Eliesa Tora, in reviewing the year that's been and what 2025 has in store. Polavinaka, Eliesa, what were some of the big news coming out of Pacifica rugby this year?
It has been a big year for Pacifica sports in a number of ways. Closer to home, both the Fijian Drua and Moana Pacifica in rugby fared well in the annual Super Rugby Pacific competition. The Drua made it into their second quarterfinals in a row, following on from their achievements in 2023. And Moana Pacifica, with new head coach Falongo Tanaumanga, won 4 of their games for the first time ever and were in contention for quarterfinal spot right up to the last round. In the women's competition, the Fijian Drua finished in the final again, but this year were not able to repeat their 2023 winning performance in the end. The Fiji men's sevens team claimed silver instead of gold at the Paris Olympics and continued as the best sevens team in the Olympic Games history, finishing in the 3 finals so far, with 2 previous gold medals as well. And they also claimed their first HSBC Sevens Series title after 22 tournament attempts, winning the Dubai Sevens in November. Fiji on the international scene, with the Flying Fijians, obviously had the best record of the 3 Pacific teams. Beating Wales at Cardiff for the first time in history, winning the Pacific Nations Cup, and meeting up with T1 teams, the All Blacks, Scotland and Ireland. In women's rugby, a big plus for the Pacific as well. The Manusima Samoa and the Fijiana winning spots at the 2025 Women's Rugby World Cup. In Sevens rugby, Samoa and Tonga have now qualified for the World Rugby Sevens Challenger Series in 2025, and both countries have the chance to qualify as core teams at the 2026 HSBC Sevens World Series. Samoa have their men's and their women's team in the mix, while Tonga men's are also going to be taking part in the 3-tournament Challenger Series in 2025. In netball, the Tongan Tala continued with their dominance in the Pacific Netball Series, winning their 4th title in a row, and Fiji creating history by winning their first ever men's title in the Nations Cup Challenger Series in Singapore. In cricket, Samoa creating history by winning the East Asia Pacific qualifiers to secure their spot at the 2025 ICC Women's Under-19 World Cup, while their male counterparts claim the ICC Men's T20 World Cup East Asia Pacific Sub-Regional Qualifier to qualify for next year's combined EAP Asia Pacific qualifiers.
How did Pacific soccer teams do?
Definitely another big year for soccer in the Pacific and Oceania as a whole. Again, New Zealand dominating both in the Nations Cup, the World Cup qualifier, and futsal and the club championships, both in the men's and the women's. In the women's football, Auckland United lifted their first OFC Women's Championship League with a 1-0 victory over Hekari United, and New Zealand again dominating in the futsal women's competition, beating Fiji 7-1 in the final. In the men qualifiers, we have New Caledonia, Tahiti and Fiji going to appear alongside New Zealand in the World Cup semi-finals in March. And I think the biggest news that has come out from soccer this year has been the announcement of the OFC Professional League, which will begin in 2026. And that is seen as the booster for Pacific soccer, especially now with New Zealand dominating all facets of soccer in Oceania in the last 10 years at least.
There are also some interesting results for the Pacific Rugby League teams. What were some of the highlights there?
Well, Rugby League, I think the biggest news has been the inclusion of a PNG team in the extended National Rugby League competition in 2028. That comes on the back of impressive showings by the PNG Kumuls, who won the 2024 Pacific Bowls title, and the PNG Hunters, who appeared in the finals of the 2024 Horse Plus Queensland Cup competition. Mate Matonga took both Australia and New Zealand to the wire in their field battles during the Pacific Cup Championship, beating the Kiwis at home in Auckland and losing by a converted try deficit to the champions Kangaroos in the final. The women's competition saw the Fetu Samoa team qualify for the 2025 Women's Rugby League World Cup after they defeated Fiji Bulikula in the Pacific Championship Cup final. The Bulikula, still have a chance to qualify for the World Cup if they can win from the repechage playoffs in early 2025.
There were also some sad moments in Pacifica Sportsi in 2024. Can you share some of that with us?
Yes, of course. It's always true that, there are always negatives that we have to deal with along with the positives we face in life, and sports is no exception. Manu Samoa Rugby, or Lakapi Samoa, cancelled their planned tour of Europe this year, citing financial difficulties. Then when that was still being discussed, Manu Samoa's now suspended head coach, Masei Mahoni Schwalga, faced allegations of sexual abuse and awaits court appearances in the new year. In Fiji, young promising boxer Ubaid Haida died in November after a month at the Lautoka Aspen Hospital, where soon 2 Pacific athletes have been banned for 3 years for using performance-enhancing drugs, and they have lost medals they won at the 2023 Pacific Games in Honiara. The duo will now miss the 2025 Mini Pacific Games and will only be available to represent their countries in the third quarter of 2027.
And looking ahead, what can we expect in 2025?
Certainly a big year ahead for Pacifica sporty teams. There are 2 World Cups in Women's Rugby and Women's Rugby League. The Pacific Netball Series returns for its 5th edition, and World Cup Soccer Oceania qualifier semi-finals are happening in New Zealand in March. There are also qualifiers for the international meets in weightlifting, beach volleyball, powerlifting and swimming. And of course, there is Super Rugby kicking off in February for Moana Pacifica and the Fijian Rua, plus the Fijiana in the women's competition. And the big one for Tonga and Samoa Rugby is trying to qualify for the Men's World Cup in 2027. As I said earlier, Fiji, New Caledonia and Tahiti have joined New Zealand in the fight for a World Cup spot in the Oceania World Cup qualifier. That happens in March here in New Zealand. Another big 2024 sporting year gone for Pacifica and Oceania, and an exciting 2025 already on the horizon. It has been an interesting sports year in a lot of ways, and I would like to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a safe festive season. Definitely looking forward to 2025.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. Have a wonderful Christmas and New Year's break. We'll be back on air in late January. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā soifua.